episode here on 1950's Farm. How are you all doing? Hope you're all having a good day. My day is not going too bad. I've made money this morning, which is pretty good. I am currently £20 richer than when I woke up, which is pretty good stuff. I still forgot to collect those 2 bales. Do you know what? After yesterday's episode, I've been sort of running around and I took a little bit more food over to the ranch, and on my way back I was like, I must remember to pick those bales, and I've still left them there. Never mind. But yeah, so I'd say the day not going too bad so far, but if I could just make $1 million by the end of the day, then I would be very happy. But yeah, as you can see, we've got a new planter. So in 1955, which is what we're in now, John Deere released a 4-row planter, a 6-row planter, and then in 1957 they then released the 8-row planter. But we're able to have the 6-row planter, which is what we've got here, and hopefully, fingers crossed, it should work very well. And as you can see, we're planting cotton, so that's the crop of choice, and I thought we'd get on with it nice and early. So we've not really got a great deal to do in terms of planting. It's going to be very, very hard to see that edge down there. Look, oh crikey, we're going to really struggle there. I don't know whether this, oh yeah, that's a bit better. You can see it a bit better now. But as I say, we're going to get this planted, and then we're not flat out at the moment. We've only got the John Deere with the drag on the back. If you think back to the winter, we overwinter ploughed this field, and with all the snow and frost that we've had, we've sort of crumbled the ground up quite nicely, made the ground quite friable. So a nice springtime drag through the weathered ploughing would work a treat. And obviously back in those days, as far as I can tell and I'm aware, and Ray has confirmed this for me, that there were no power hours and such things back in the 1950s, and he said that the drag was the way that you would pull down the ploughing. So that's what we're gonna do. But yeah, so we're doing all right. I've got a feeling actually this one might have been over winter dragged, which is fine. That's still the way even in real life I would do it if I so as I say, Ray has sort of said before, you sort of plough every field, and he said that wasn't necessarily always what we did, farmers did, or whatever, and he said sometimes if you'd had a crop in that could be sort of what they used to call overwinter dragged, he said they would do. They wouldn't necessarily plough everything all of the time. He said back in the day, obviously, and even today, I mean, as he said, great expense. Some farms couldn't afford to plough every field. Some farms only wanted to plough in front of certain crops. So he said then they would then sort of do that, but not every field, and not in front of every crop would get sort of ploughed. So he said just be aware of that. So I've got a horrible feeling he's now going through my drilling. I think I've caught him up a little bit too soon. Yeah, he's gone through my drilling. I can't see much, but I can see that he's definitely gone through that. and he's probably taken out the mark as well, which is of course lovely. I actually can't see now. Alright, I think we've joined it up. So yeah, as I say, it's been we're progressing nicely now in terms of 1950s farm, and as I say, we've you know, I've sort of over the last couple of years or so, I've you know, sort of skipped winters, whereas this winter we have done a little bit more in the sense of, you know, I've shown a little bit more sort of over winter ploughing, a little bit more of the animal you know, sort of work that you know, obviously I do. It's finding that balance of keeping everyone involved, but not then, you know, sort of keeping everyone involved by, you know, 4 or 5. I think I've kind of made that mistake a little bit on the farmers market series. I'm starting now to, you know, I sort of recorded the episode the other day, and you know, sort of came away and then watched the episode that has gone out this week. So the one that I recorded the other day will go out obviously next week. And I was like, ooh, you know, I've recorded, you know, not 2 videos exactly the same, but very similar. So yeah, I'm always conscious that you know, obviously I don't want to do that. You know, I don't want to, you know, repeat videos, because you know that's not good. So it's just a case of finding a balance and sort of finding a kind of, you know, oh, well, we haven't done the animals, you know, for a long time. We'll have a video of that, and then, you know, sort of moving around. But yeah, we're doing all right, really. You know, we're doing really well, and as I say, the farm's progressing. You know, technology is slowly beginning to progress. You know, John Deere recognizing, you know, in the mid 50s that, you know, planters needed to get bigger, tractors were getting bigger, horsepower was getting more. You know, tractors were gradually going away from the sort of 40s and 50 horsepower to, you know, 90s. I think I'm right in saying their crawler that they brought out in 1952. I'm pretty sure that was 120 horsepower. Now I may be wrong on that, so don't fully quote me on it, but I'm pretty certain it was a long time ago since I read up on that crawler. But I think that was what horsepower that was, and hence the reason why they built the plough for it. They did. And you know, and why then, you know, sort of planters like this became available. Obviously they had the big seeder that came out with the plough at the same time, so that was in 1953, I think it was, 53, 54, somewhere around there. I think 53 it was. And they had you know, the big seeder that then came with the plough. You know, the drags were getting slightly bigger. Cultivators in general, you know, disked or tined, were getting bigger, and yeah, farming was definitely starting to innovate and to grow. Looks as if he may have left my drilling alone this time, which is good of him. That is quite hard to see in those shadows. I think he's about to start his up and down rows, which I'd be quite grateful for. It means he might actually take out my mark. I may have been a little quick off the mark doing this breed, actually, excuse the pun. We'll wait and see what happens. But I wanted to get on today, so I want to get this field done. And we are gradually catching him up. I feel like a great white shark hunting its seal prey. We'll just wait here and see what he does, because he's bound to do something that's going to collide with me. Yep. Come on, who saw that coming? Oh dear. Hang on, let me get out of the way. Alright, we'll go this side and then we'll try and do it. That's kind of like, I was thinking, he's a little bit wider than what we are. I was thinking, I'll be alright, because by the time I get to the field, it had gone round twice, which he had. He was just completing his second pass by the time I got to the field, but still didn't really save me in the end. Never mind. Nobody saw, right? So today, and I'm not saying this because I want kind of loads of people in the comments to go, "Oh, happy birthday," But today is my birthday as I record this, right? And and work did a few funny things on my birthday. So the second farm more so that, I mean, the first farm was just really nice to me on my birthday, and they would buy me, like I remember one year a brand new Challenger boiler suit overalls, coveralls, whatever however you call them, but I call them a boiler suit. Had come out, and they bought me that, and they bought me. Just trying to think some of the things they bought, like hats, and or a bottle of champagne, which I don't drink, but the thought's there, and appreciate the thought and the sentiment behind it. So that was sort of kind of fair enough. But yeah, so they would sort of do sort of nice things, and the second farm that I worked on, they were not so much into the nice things as practical jokes, and they would do sort of lots of things. So one particular year, I was potato planting, and they'd gone to the trouble of coming in either really early or coming back later on the day before, and what they'd done was, for whatever reason, had possessed them, but they decided to take the planter off my tractor, because I was taty planting that year, and they took the planter off my tractor. And of course, a lot of people sort of kind of won't realise is that if you've got, like, my wheel tractor was a John Deere tractor, which is what I used to do most of my planting and stuff like that on, with the potato, because I had the row crops on, and unusual for the UK, I had dual wheeled row crops, so it, as I say, unusual but they were looking to make light footprints and spread the weight, and I had a 6 meter planter. I had a Grimmy for the first 2 years that I worked there, and then I think the third year they bought a 6 meter DeWolf potato planter. And now they run pretty much all DeWolf. Veg harvesters, that includes like carrot harvesters, the one that we've got in the game, that includes potato harvesters, the planting equipment, and all, sort of all of that. So they've sort of gone over to DeWolf, which is a shame, because as I say, when I worked there as well, in the first couple of years that I worked there, when I was doing the potato harvesting, I had a Grimmy GT 170, and I really liked that harvester. But in honesty, when I can't remember when it was, but we then swapped, because we had 4 GT 170s and 1 self-propelled harvester. They then bought a new self-propelled harvester with rear tracks, and they swapped out the 4 Grimmy GT 170s for 2 standard potato harvesters, and I have to admit, I did prefer the Standen over the Grimmy. Can't see my mark now. I think it's here. Yeah, so I did prefer the Standen, as I say, over the Grimmy. It was what can I say? I don't know. It's hard to explain because obviously a lot of people that sort of that are into farming sim and farming in general perhaps haven't worked on farms, or if they have worked on farms, they perhaps not necessarily use the equipment. I mean, I watch obviously all of the sort of major UK farm sim channels, and I'd see stuff and I think, wow, I'd love to have driven that, and it may be stuff that was, sort of available, when I was sort of working. I think, well, I'd have loved it if we'd have had one of them, or do you know what I mean? Like, I'd love to have had a go with that. But yeah, so it's sort of kind of hard to explain, but from an operator's kind of point of view, the Standen was a lot better harvester to use. In terms of turning, in terms of actual lifting and least damage, they didn't block as much if it was if there was a lot of trash in it, or a lot of like if it was quite wet. The Grimmy had a bit of a tendency to block up on the second web, and I'd be forever getting out and unblocking it and taking big clumps of sort of clods and mud that had sort of built up and jammed the webs, whereas the Standen it didn't seem to do that as much. There seemed to be better clearance on the transfer from the first web to the second webs, and then on to the unloading elevators. It just was a nicer, even though I preferred the Grimmy looked better, although the Standen was nice, to be fair to it, but I'd still, in terms of looks, the Grimmy for me stood out, was nice. But yeah, so but yeah, yeah, I got to work and they'd taken the planter off, and for some unbeknown reason, they'd left the planter in the yard, but taken my tractor all the way over to farm 3. Now, my base was farm 1, but I spent most of my time on farm 2, which I know is odd, but I was under farm 1's team. Farm 1 team was arable, so I like sort of combine and that sort of stuff. But farm 2 was like the veg, so that was where you kept all the veg stuff. So if they said you were to go potato harvesting, go to farm 2, there would be the potato harvesters or the planters or the ridges or whatever. But it would all be to and that's how they sort of did it. So it was kind of like we always knew where everything was. Well, they took them to farm 3. Now farm 3 was our orchard farm. So that was where we had like all the apple trees, pear trees, cherry trees, sort of stuff like that. And also as well on the orchard, sort of farm 3, we had a lot of greenhouses where they grew tomatoes, cucumbers, and sort of stuff like that. And that was to feed the farm shop. So they weren't grown in massive quantities, but they were grown enough of and put in storage to feed the farm shop. So that that was what they sort of did, and yeah, so they'd taken it over to farm 3, my tractor, and like I say, why I sort of don't know. So I got to work in the morning, and obviously my tractor wasn't there, and Adrian had sort of called me into the where we met in the mornings, because normally, as I said before, like if you knew what you was doing and you knew where you was going, you didn't have to go in with the morning meet. You could just sort of kind of get on to onto your tractor and just disappear. and go off to your field and you know, sort of do whatever. But obviously, if you didn't know where you were doing, didn't know what you was doing or where you was going, you would go into the morning meet. I mean, so you could still go in if you wanted to, you just didn't have to. But you know, but anyway, Adrian had sort of said, "Oh, morning meet," and because I'd locked my tractor up in the shed, and even though they'd left the planter in the middle of the yard, for whatever reason I hadn't noticed. Anyway, I've gone in like to the morning, you know, to the morning meet sort of thing. And in there was a birthday cake, and like the lads had, I can't remember what they bought me something from my tractor. I can't remember what it was now, but and for my Challenger, and anyway, so I went in there, like, you know, and everyone was like, "Good morning," and you know, "Happy birthday," and you know, blah blah blah, and it was really good. And Adrian said, like, you know, we'd quite like it if after work today, you know, you'd come and have a drink with us. We know you don't drink, but you know, come and have a pint with us all. You know, and they said, like, it'd be, you know, nice. We'll treat you for your birthday. We'll take you out for a meal or, you know, whatever. And you know, it said, like, you know, it's up to you. Anyway, in the end, we agreed that on the Friday we'd go out for a meal, and it would include sort of like you know, wives and girlfriends and what have you. So does all that in the morning. Yeah, gets into you know, right, you have to go to work now, lads. You know, you all know what you're doing, you all know where you're going. You know, happy birthday, James. Probably won't see you today. Okay, fair enough. And he must have been in on it. He must have been in on it. So I've come out and I'm walking across the yard, and it's only when I was walking across the yard that I've suddenly sort of like, why the hell was my planter in the middle of the yard? And it had like balloons tied to it, and you know, stuff like this. And I was thinking, that's great that you've put balloons on it and everything. I thought, and like, you know, sort of we're walking across, and I said to Steve, I said, what is this here? And he goes, I don't know, mate. He said, it must be where you left it. I said, I can assure you I didn't leave it here. I said, no, I can definitely assure you I didn't leave it without my tractor. I said, where the hell's my tractor gone? And so he goes, oh, I don't know, mate, don't know. He said, no. He said, don't know. He said, you know, yeah, find it. So, and because like the birthday that it was also Easter weekend. So my birthday was on the Thursday. It was Good Friday obviously on the Friday, and then sort of Easter Sunday, and then my birthday was the Thursday, which this year it's the Wednesday, and then obviously you've got Good Friday in 2 days' time, and. So I come out, and when I got to the planter, there was an envelope stuck on the planter, and it just said, you bear in mind, we're busy potato planting. You know, we have like sort of, you know, probably getting on for about 2,500-3,000 acres of potatoes to plant. And I'm kind I'm kind of like, and that's spread over sort of 3 different farms, so it's not all on one farm. It's spread over quite a large area. So I've like, you know, it's got and then when I opened up the envelope, there's a letter inside saying, "Happy birthday, Jimmy. You've heard of an Easter egg. Well, of an Easter egg hunt. We've decided that you should do an Easter tractor hunt. So you've got to go around the yard, find the clues to find your tractor." So there I am. I'm sort of standing there, and the thing is, all the lads, you know, have got onto their tractors. They've got onto, you know, whatever it is that they're doing. You know, some were on the Challengers, like, you know, ridging ahead of me. You know, some are on de-stoners, some are on, you know, whatever. But we was all, you know, and they've all gone off to the field, and I'm sort of standing there, and I'm sort of looking, and I thought, the bloody hell am I gonna do? I thought, like, you know, I can't, you know. And we had set targets that we had to hit every day. So Adrian's come out and he's gone, what's the matter, mate? I said, they've hit my tractor. And he went, who? I said, well, I don't know, the lads, I suppose. I said, I don't know who specific. He said, well, what do you mean they've hid your tractor? I said, well, look, my planter's here, all balloons and ribbons and happy birthday and all of that. I said, like, you know, very nice and everything. I said, they've hit my tractor. I said, I got this letter. So he went, God, he said, I wish they'd grow up. I said to him, I said, any idea? He said, no. He said, I haven't, mate. I said, apparently I've got to go around the yard looking for clues. And he said, we ain't got time for this, James. And I said, well, I know that. I said, I didn't do it. He said, no, I know. He said, you didn't. He said, but he said, hang on, I'll ring. He said, I'll ring the one I think who's done it. So I said, okay. So he rung him. He's like, where's James's tractor? And he said, oh, he's got to find the clues. And he said, no, look, we ain't got time for this. He said, like, where is James's tractor? So he said, he's got to find the clues. And Adrian, like, he goes, look, I'm not being funny, lads. He said, we ain't got time for this. He said, like, he said, a lot of you want bloody Easter weekend off. If you want Easter weekend off, he said, then, we told you we need to have a set amount planted. He said, like, James needs to get on. I mean, we had, so we were operating 3 planters. And he's like, so in the end, they gave in. They told him where my planter was. Well, because where my tractor was, sorry, and they taken my tractor to Farm 3, which, as I say, is the like the orchard farm. So Farm 2, which is where I'd left everything, because obviously that's the sort of veg side of the business. On Farm 2, that was in Sutton Bridge. Farm 3 was in Wisbech and Mary, and from sort of Sutton Bridge to Wisbech and Mary was sort of a good sort of 20 minutes or so down the road. And so Adrian was like, he goes, I can't believe they've done this, get in. So I got in the truck and he took me over, and then when we got there, it still wasn't in the yard. They'd left it. I don't know how they'd managed to get it in, but so we had 2 big apple orchards there, but there was like a road down the middle, so they were split in 2, and there was a road down the middle, and at the far end of that road was like a shed, and it sort of held the sprayer, and it held sort of the things you need, like for the apple orchard. And they'd driven it right down to the far end, and like literally when I drove it back, it just fitted between the 2 rows. I mean, you had to be dead precise, otherwise you'd hit a tree. And obviously, the one thing they didn't want was me hitting the trees. Yeah, there was no fruit on them at that point. I think probably a lot of them perhaps hadn't, or were just literally coming into bud, I suppose. But yeah. So anyway, got back, and then I had to put the planter on, obviously, and then sort of get to the field. And when it was lunchtime, I said to them, what on earth possessed you to do that? And they said, I thought it'd be a giggle. I said, but we're so busy, and they was like, yeah. He goes, don't worry, we had 2 other planters going. He said, like, he said, it's all right. He said, it's no problem. He said, it weren't like you're the only planter. He said, we had 2 others that were going. I said, yeah, I know. I said, but I said, I ain't now got my acreage in ever for the day, because they had like tracking software on the tractor, so they could see how much we were doing per day. And you sort of you had an expected amount that you were expected to do every day. And I said, like, I ain't gonna get that now, man. And they said, well, you'll have to stay later or whatever, or sort of don't worry about it. They'll probably sort of let you off, knowing that it wasn't your fault, which in the end they did, to be fair. So at the end of the month, I did still get my acreage. I nearly caught it up, but we got some rain right at the end, and it was enough for me not to be able to catch it up. But I was going in Saturdays. I was going because I was frightened I wasn't going to get my monthly bonus for doing the amount that we'd done, and that you were supposed to have done. And so yeah. And I mean, I say other crazy things that they'd sort of done was sort of hiding my tractor, and then hiding my keys to my Challenger. So one year I was ploughing, and I'd gone back to the yard. I'd sheared a breastplate, a furrow off my plough. I cheered it, but it hadn't come off the plough. Oh, well, actually, it hadn't. It had come off the plough in the field that I was in, and what had happened was it had come off the plough and buried itself into the ground, like it'd come off underneath in the ground, sort of thing. And so when I got back to the farm, it wasn't there. It was still in the ground. Don't get me wrong. As soon as I got back to the field, it didn't take a huge amount to find, of effort to find it. But when I was at the yard anyway, I was sort of, got there and I wanted some diesel. That's what I wanted, and I hadn't realised. So it was lucky that it kind of come off on the last sort of breed down. I then got to the end of the field and thought, I need some diesel. It's quite close to the farm anyway, so I thought I'll nip back, get some diesel, and then carry on, sort of thing. And so I got to the farm, was sort of sorting out the diesel. Then realised that I'd obviously, sheared a breastplate off, and I thought, that's okay. I thought I'll go into the workshop, and I'll, just get another one and I'll bolt it on. They were fairly sort of easy and quick to change, and to fit and everything. So it wasn't like, it was going to be a big job or anything. And it was one of those jobs that you were kind of expected to do, even though we had mechanics and engineers and that on the farm. You were kind of expected to do it yourself because it was such a sort of quick and easy sort of job. And so I goes off into the workshop, and I had obviously my toolbox and what have you. And when I got to the workshop, there was a couple of lads in there, and they said, like, what are you doing in here? So I said, I've sheared a breastplate. I said, I've got to look for another one. So I'm talking to a couple of the lads, and a couple of the other lads that were in there were sort of coming and going and what have you. Anyway, eventually, sort of, right, I must get on, lads. Got this to do, got that, what have you, got to get on. So like, yeah, no problem. And get the breastplate out of the workshop, go to the tractor. Tractor's locked up, and they've taken the keys, and because on the front of my Challenger I had my toolbox, sort of near the front steps. I had my toolbox there, taken the toolbox, taken my keys, and I was like, it was locked up. So I was sort of standing there for a second, scratching my head, and then thinking, I thought, I don't know why I would have locked it, but I probably locked it because I was going, sort of over to the other end of the yard. I don't know why I would have locked it. I never would have normally. So start patting myself down, trying to, sort of feel for my keys or whatever. And then I'm looking on the floor, and then one of the lads comes over. What's the matter, mate? I said, my tractor's locked. I said, my keys are gone. He said, no. I said, yeah. I said, I can't believe it. He said, where you looked? He said, around a tractor. And I said, yeah. I said, it was in. I said, they were in the ignition. So he said, that's where they still are then. I said, the tractor's locked. I said, I can't get in it. He said, oh Christ. He said, I reckon. He said, you know what's bloody happened here, don't you? So I said, what's that? He said, these new Challengers, he said, they've got a central locking thing. So he said, if you leave them unattended for a set amount of time, they automatically lock because they think they've been left in the field. So he said, they lock, he said, so obviously no one can get in. He said, your bloody keys have been locked in there. So I said to him, oh, you're joking. I said, no. I said, that's the only bloody set of keys I got. I said, I can't, I said, I said, unreal. I said, have you lads got some keys? And they said, no, Challengers are over at, sort of Farm 1 or wherever, I think I was at Farm 1, to be fair. So they, might have been at Farm 2 or whatever, and wherever they were. And I was like, I said, bloody hell, I said, I can't believe that. So anyway, looking around. So I'm looking through the cab of me Challenger, Right, trying to see if I can see the keys in the ignition, right? And the way the light was and and everything, I couldn't sort of see in like sort of far enough to tell whether they were or not. So I'm like, oh, what? You know, I'm thinking, oh, I was like, ah. So one of the lads said, so are you allowed to ring Adrian? I said, oh, I said, I can't ring Adrian. I said, what's he going to say when I say I've locked my keys in my tractor? So I said, I don't know. He said, but you're allowed to ring him, mate. He said, because he'll have to get in touch with Challenger. He said, and you know, he said that they'll have to cut you a new key, like. So I said, like, he said, you know, that could take days. I said, oh, I said, I can't get this ploughing bloody finished. He said, oh, he said, it's bad luck, mate. He said, especially as you didn't know. He said, you know, it's a wonder that no one told you. And I said, no, I said, I didn't know. I said, to be fair, I said, I've left my tractor before. I said, and it's never happened. He said, well, you've just got lucky, ain't you? So I said, well, clearly, I said. So I ring Adrian. So I says to Adrian, I says, hello, Adrian. I said, it's James here. I said, I've locked my tractor, my keys in my Challenger. And he said, you what? I said, I've locked my keys in the Challenger. He said, how you managed to do that? I said, well, I left the keys in the ignition. I said, I filled up with diesel, realised, I said, I'd broken a breastplate off my plough. I said, or sheared it off. I said, like, because I said, the plate that holds it on is still there. I said, but obviously there's no breastplate. So he said, right. I said, so I thought, while I was filling up with diesel, I thought, I know what I'll do. I'll let that fill up. I'll go into the workshop, I said, and like get the breastplate and everything. I said, get it all ready and then just back my tractor up to the workshop. He said, yeah. I said, well, I then was talking to one of the lads. He said, right. I said, I've obviously left my tractor too long. I said, and the anti-theft system on it has locked my tractor. He said, what the bloody hell are you talking about? I said, the anti-theft system on the tractor. I said, it, you know, apparently if you leave them too long, they think you've left them in the field, so they automatically lock. He said, have you been drinking? I said, no. He said, have you been smoking the funny fags? I said, no. He said, what the bloody hell are you talking about? So I said, well, the lad said, he said, they're winding you up. I said, you what? He said, they're winding you up. I said, what do you mean they're winding me up? He said, they're winding you up, James. He said, that hasn't got a bloody anti-theft system on it that locks after you leave it for. I said, oh, right. He said, what's today, James? So I said, April the 16th. So he said, yeah, what is today? So I said, wow. I said, my birthday, I guess. He said, exactly. He said, and what do you lot do to each other on your birthdays? He said, you bloody wind each other. He said, they've got your bloody keys. So I said, oh. I said, all right. I said, thanks. I said, I feel a bit of a wally now. Well, he said, I can't believe how gullible you are sometimes, boy. He said, anyway, he said, go get on. So I said, yeah, all right. I said, thank you very much. So I come there, I got in the workshop. They're all laughing. So I said to him, I said, you assholes. I said, can't believe you did that to me. So I said, well, where's my keys? So, and bear in mind, I'd been stood near the Challenger the whole time I was talking on the phone, right? Bear in mind, I'd looked all around my Challenger, what have you, right? And I said, where's my keys? I said, you got my keys? He said, no, I ain't got your keys. He said, it's on your tractor. So I said, it bloody ain't. I said, I've been round my tractor. He said, your keys are on your tractor. So I said, they're not. I said, I've looked. He said, James, your keys are on your tractor. He said, go and look properly. So I went and looked around, couldn't find them. I was looking, so they said, well, look the other side and look at the front, and you know, you're just looking near the door. So I went round, and what they done was, so we have in the front weights. I had a flat hoe in there, and it was basically sort of sharpened to a blade. And what I used it for was for getting soil off implements and my tractor and what have you, for going down the road, because obviously we didn't want to leave a lot of soil down the road. And one of the big things about the farm that I worked on was, you know, you had to try and keep the local people that are in and around the fields happy by not sort of leaving too much mud on the roads and leaving too much muck on the roads and this, that, and everything else, right? So I had that in there, and what they'd done was they'd hung them from that Now bear in mind that stands above my bonnet, right? So from the side of the tractor where I, was stood around the door, I would have easily have been able to see, which just proves that, you're looking, but you're not actually looking. Yeah, so then I get back and I get my tractor unlocked. I reverse it back to the workshop. I then get out and get the breastplate, get it to the thing, think right, get the toolbox on the front, go to get my toolbox, and then I realise they've taken my tool. And I was like, I come back and I went, lads, I said, where's my bloody toolbox? And they said, oh, it's an anti-theft thing. They said if you leave your tractor unattended for too long, it thinks it's in the field, and what it does is it automatically hides your toolbox, so as no one nicks your tools. And I said, shut up. I said, where's my toolbox? And they said, oh, right. I said, your toolbox is in there on the shelf. So I was like, so I went in. Anyway, it was literally like sort of just as I walked through the door. So I took the toolbox out, to put it back on my tractor. And I come back in. They said, the funny thing is, I said, what's that? They said, we hung your keys somewhere where they were high so you could see them and they were fairly obvious. I said, yeah. He said, and they were glinting in the sun for, most of the time. I said, yeah. He said, you didn't see them. I said, no. He said, you didn't notice that your toolbox had gone. He said, and what's even worse is, he said, we carried your toolbox past you while you were talking to us. And I said, oh, I had no idea. And they was like, Jesus. They said, you want to, try being a bit more observant, mate. You wouldn't lose so much stuff. I said, to be fair, lads, I said, I wouldn't lose it if you behaved yourself. And they said, well, that's true. They said, most things you do lose, we've hidden. I said, yeah, exactly. I said, but yeah, so that was just a couple of things that, as I say, they sort of did on the old birthday front, and yeah, it was. They were good lads. Like I say, I really enjoyed, sort of working there and what have you. Like I say, they were good lads, and it was always done in, sort of the best possible taste. One for the Kenny Everett fans out there for you. But yeah, so it was. As I say, so that was just a few of the things that they did. There were lots of it. Most of them, I can't remember most of them now, but I sort of remember those two specifically because as I say, the potato planting one, they managed to annoy Adrian as well. Because the other thing was, I had to then drive the tractor back from Wisbech. So it's like 20 minutes in the car, Wisbech from Mary. I had to drive it back in the tractor, which was like sort of half me. It was quite heavy traffic as well because I had to go through Wisbech, and so it sort of took getting on for about 45 minutes to get the tractor back. Then I had to get it on, and then I had to get it all sort of kind of greased and sort of morning service checks and everything, and then get to the field. And so it was getting on for sort of like lunchtime by the time I'd got there. And yeah, so well, I'll tell you how bad it was. So I assumed they would still be in the same field, and of course they'd moved on, like they'd moved to the next one. So then I had to go like a bit more travelling to get to the next field. I mean, thankfully the farm sort of planted and drilled everything in big blocks, so you were never travelling that far, so it wasn't like a huge travel to the next field, but it was one I could have done without, I'll be honest with you. But yeah, no, as I say, they were little toe rags really, but as I say, it was all done in good fun and good taste, and it was and sort of I joined in with the lads to sort of do the other lads and what have you. So it was all good fun. But yeah, I just thought I'd sort of kind of today just share that with you. I mean, normally Tuesday is the chatty video, but I thought I'd sort of kind of save it till today's episode. Mainly because as I say, I'd sort of had those sort of stories, and I thought that'd be quite good to tell them on my birthday. That's when they all took part, on my birthday. So I thought that's what I do. So hopefully you've enjoyed them. Hopefully you've got a little bit of amusement out of them. I mean, as I say, it's they amused me, and then because I was, sort of the thing with me is, I'm quite a quiet person. I don't sort of like sort of confrontations, and I don't like, so I'm sort of quite happy and willing to go along with sort of what people say. Because I sort of think, well, they know more than me, they're cleverer than me, in terms like with the tractor self-locking, because it thinks you've left it in the field unattended. Yeah. Well, and I sort of, I'm in the tractor sort of a little bit later that day, I'm going up and down thinking, you bloody idiot, there's nothing like that on the tractor. I mean, it was like, what? This wasn't my birthday, but I was ploughing. I think it was autumn ploughing, and a couple of the lads had to stop doing what they were doing because it had got too wet. The challengers were slipping, and I was sort of still ploughing okay. But as the sort of day and the rain persisted, and everything, sort of the day passed by, the rain persisted, and eventually it was starting to get so that in places I was sort of starting to spin and lose traction, it was obviously starting to pull me into the furrow and what have you. It was beginning to make the ploughing look a bit of a mess. So I rung the lads. I said, "Look, I'm coming back." I said, "I'm losing traction now." I said, and I said, like, being pulled into the furrow, it's looking a mess. So they said to me, "Oh, you want to use the traction control? We're all still going." So I said, "Really?" They said, "Yeah, just use traction control." I said, "My Challenger doesn't have a traction control." I said, "It's on tracks." I said, "Surely the whole tractor is traction, isn't it? Hence the word, track." And they said, "No, no, no." I said, "Don't be silly." And they said, "No, no, no, no." And they said, "Like, your flashing light button." So I said, "Yeah." So he said, "Look, if you press that," he said, "and turn that on." So I was like, "Right." He said, and then there was I can't remember what the button did. And it was a button that we never used, very rarely used anyway. But you had to use it in combination with the flashing light button and this other button. Well, I can't remember what the button was, but this other button. They said, like, if you turn them both on, they said, the traction will kick in and you'll be able to pull. You'll be fine. Like, keep going. Like, we need this ploughing doing. Like, so I've turned the flashing lights on and I've pressed this other button and I'm going and I'm still losing traction. And in the end, I just I was kind of like, I just sort of thought, no, even with the traction control on now, I'm still, not able to pull, sort of properly. So I sort of packed up and sort of went back to the yard. And they said to me, "What are you doing back here?" So I said, even with the traction control on, I said, like, I still couldn't pull it. And because they all started laughing, and then sort of Adrian sort of looks at me and he goes, "Traction control? What, on a tractor?" He said, "With tracks." He said, traction control, tracks. He said, like, "Put it all together, James. What have you got?" So I said, "Well, that's what I said to them, but they he said, "You believe anything them buggers tell you, don't you?" And I said, "Oh, I can't believe I fell for that." I said, "I even knew that it didn't have one." I said, "But it was so convincing. Just press that button, turn on the flashing lights with that button in combination. It, puts on the traction control." I said, "Why on earth you would have to put on your flashing?" And they said, "All it basically did, James, was it was told everybody on the road that A, you're a bit of a weirdo because you think you're going to be meeting traffic in a field." He said, that it was the hazard lights bit. So I remember it's coming back now. So they told me to put the flashing lights on and press the hazard light switch. And basically what that meant was that it was warning people that I'd got traction. Honestly, I can't believe how much of an idiot I am sometimes, but I genuinely am a first class idiot at times. And as I say, I'm so gullible and believe every word they tell me. But yeah, so but I don't mind, as I say, like, sort of sharing the stories. I just thought today, sort of as I say, given the day it is, I thought I'd share the stories of the things that the lads did. But hopefully you've enjoyed it. Anyway, I'm going to leave this episode here because it's going to be a long old drive back to the yard, and I've only got that field to roll, and then that's pretty much it again for March. So next time we come in will be in April, and we'll have the corn to drill, we'll have the soybeans to drill, and you know, so we'll be getting on, you know, with stuff like that. So yeah. As I say, I hope you've enjoyed the episode. I hope you've enjoyed sort of listening to me, you know, being pranked and you know, being a gullible fool. If you have enjoyed it, why not hit the like button? It really does helps the algorithm. Why not hit that subscribe button if you like my content and you haven't subscribed already? I mean, interestingly enough, actually on that thing, so I have a lad that you know, messages quite a lot, and I was talking to him the other. I think he's from New Zealand, I think, or Australia, somewhere out that way, and he sent me a message, and you know, was sort of chatting, and then he sent me a message soon after that and said, "Can't believe it. I've been watching you all this time." He said, "I'm sure I'd subscribe to you." He said, "No, I haven't." He said, "So I have now subscribed." I said, "It's amazing." I said, "Like I've got channels that I watch week in, you know, week out, sort of thing." I said, like, and then sometimes I sort of look down and think, well, I'm not even subscribed to this channel. So why not? I love the stuff they do, you know. So I sort of subscribe. So it could be that you think you've subscribed to me and you perhaps haven't. So, you know, as I say, like, it's free to do. You get notified obviously every time I drop a video, and you know, as I say, it does help the channel. We didn't quite get to the 1,000 subscribers, and you know, on my birthday, which, you know, it was a tall order. I'll be honest with you, I'd sort of set the goal vast and wide, and you know, unfortunately, we didn't quite get there, but you know, never mind. But anyway, as I say, I'm going to leave the video here. Thanks ever so much for watching. I've really enjoyed having your company on this episode, and I can't wait to see you in the next one. Bye for now.